So now we're recording. So again, we have Dr. Brooke White with the MidOhio Regional Planning Commission. She's going to tell us a little bit about what's up in our air here in Columbus. And Brooke, I'll go ahead and turn it over to you. Let me know when you want to when you want me to advance the slides.
Will do. Yeah, and thanks, Dave. That's a really good little fact that we breathe in. Was it 2,000 gallons of air every day? So I think air quality is something that's kind of interesting because we often don't think about what's in the air that we breathe in, but we breathe in a lot. And so it's really important to be thinking about what types of pollution we have in the air. So I'm happy to be here to discuss that with you today. So I'm waiting for those slides to come up. Yes?
Oh, can you not see them?
Nope, I still see
okay.
the GreenSpot slide.
Let's go ahead and do this then. Share. There it is. All right. How about now?
Great.
Awesome.
Thanks. So yeah, I thought I'd just start briefly with mentioning that I'm coming from the MidOhio Regional Planning Commission, a little about what we are. So we really are conveners of local governments. But we do a lot of different work in planning and sustainability, so working on the environment. And one of our programs is the air quality program. So I'm excited to tell you a little bit more about what we do through that air quality program at Morpsc. Next, please. So one of the main things we do and that we're known for is providing both forecasts and air quality alerts. So an air quality forecast looks very much like your weather forecast. It goes out 5 days, but rather than telling you whether or not it's going to be sunny or rainy, it tells you how much air pollution is going to be in the air. So we provide those for free. You can always sign up for those if you go to morpsc.org/air quality. Another thing we do is we put out air quality alerts. And so this graph here is giving you a little bit of a sense of how we determine when we're going to put out those air quality alerts. So we do use our forecasts and we put out air quality alerts a day ahead of time. And we do that when we're expecting air pollution levels to be in this orange zone that's shown here, which is unhealthy for sensitive groups. And I'll get a little bit into who is in those sensitive groups as well in a minute. But we put out air quality alerts as soon as it's in the orange or above categories to make sure that people know that they need to take some steps to protect their health and also steps to help decrease air pollution so we can have as minimal health impact as possible. Next slide, please. So you can find out about air quality alerts and forecasts in a number of ways. So like I mentioned, you can go to morpsc.org/air quality and sign up for free text or email forecasts and alerts. We also do have a hotline that you can call. They're available. We also work with a lot of different partners to try to get this information out. You may have noticed air quality alerts on highway signs in the past. So that's a partnership we have with the Ohio Department of Transportation. We also work with the National Weather Service. You may have noticed air quality alerts popping up on your phone through some of your weather apps. And that happens in part because we have a partnership with the National Weather Service. So definitely trying to get out the message as broadly as possible there. Next slide, please. So yeah, as I mentioned, there's the website that you can go to. We also have current air quality displayed on that website, so you can conveniently find out what the current air quality is. And you can also find out what the forecast is going to be for the next 5 days. So you can always visit that website if you need up-to-date air quality information. Next slide, please. So what do you do when you hear that there's an air quality alert? Well, know that we're putting out the alert for the next day, so you can help anticipate and think about your schedule and think about what you might want to do. So sensitive people, and again, I'll get into a little bit more about who's really sensitive to air pollution. I mean, everybody is, we all breathe air, but some are a little bit more sensitive than others. So if you are sensitive, you can do things like scheduling outdoor activities for the morning. And this sounds like a very particular sort of action to take. Part of this is because the pollutant that we see most of our air quality alerts for these days is something called ozone. And those ozone levels tend to increase throughout the day and really peak later in the afternoon. So if you're sensitive to that pollutant, you can do more activities in the morning and avoid some of that exposure. You can also consider it's still good to exercise and get that activity in, maybe do it indoors on the days when there's an air quality alert. Maybe choose to do a shorter or less intense activity, but definitely also watch out for symptoms. Next slide, please. And so specifically for folks with asthma, so getting into some of the people who are more sensitive to air pollution, those with asthma, think about keeping some quick relief medicine handy. And if you have an asthma action plan, definitely follow it on air quality alert days. Next slide, please. So what are some of the sources of air pollution for us? There are a lot of different potential sources. There are also a number of different pollutants that come from these different sources. Some of the major sources that we have in our region, so I was mentioning ozone, that's one of the pollutants that we track for forecasts and alerts. Ozone tends to come mainly from transportation in our area. So cars and trucks in our highways are a major source of air pollution. And in fact, we saw really low levels of air pollution over this last year when we had the pandemic shutdown, in part because we had a lot less cars and trucks on our highways during that time. Another pollutant that we have is particulate matter. So that's little suspended particles in the air. It's not a gas, it's a particle. And a lot of that comes in from energy, from power production. And both of these pollutants can also be transported from other areas into our region. So specifically, we tend to see some pollutant coming in from the Cincinnati and Dayton areas and being pushed by winds into our region. And sometimes that sets us up for an air quality alert day. Next slide, please. So again, this slide just reinforces what are some of the sources of air pollution. So I have ozone pollution and that particle pollution that I mentioned. And this just shows that ozone has that big dark gray bar that's showing how much is coming from cars and trucks. So for ozone, it's really traffic. And for particle pollution, it tends to be more stationary sources. So things like power production and industry. Next slide, please. So I mentioned that I was going to get into the question of who is sensitive. And so I'm just going to go through a few of these categories. We do see that children tend to be very sensitive to air pollution. In fact, exposure to air pollution during childhood can even set you up for decreased lung function throughout your life. There was an interesting study that was done in California looking at children who grew up in Southern California in an area where there's a lot of air pollution exposure. And their lung function was tracked throughout their life. And it was found that even kids who then later as adults moved away from the region, their lung function stayed minimized due to the early air pollution exposure, even if they moved to another place that had better air pollution rates. So this is really important for children's lung development as they grow. Next slide. Older adults can also tend to be particularly sensitive to air pollution. Sometimes this is due to underlying conditions, maybe of asthma, maybe of COPD, but it's definitely another sensitive group. Next slide, please. And then also people with specific pre-existing conditions, such as asthma, COPD, or heart disease. So yeah, if you have any of those conditions, you can be more sensitive to the effects of air pollution. Next slide, please. So as I was mentioning, there's some specific impacts that children tend to see. And this is just a little list of some of the impacts that we see on children's health due to air pollution exposure. There is a tendency towards more premature births. So you have premature babies due to exposure to air pollution for the mothers. Children can develop asthma. They can have issues with lung growth and long-term function, as I was mentioning before, and then also risk of things like infection, like colds and pneumonia. Next slide, please. It is important to note that air pollution doesn't just affect children, it affects a lot of different people, and it can affect your entire body. So it affects an enormous number of different systems throughout your body. And interestingly, so something like particle matter, particle pollution, which I mentioned before, part of why that can really affect a lot of different parts of your body is that it's so small that when you breathe it in, it can go past the cilia. So there's little hairs in your lung that sweep out and try to sweep out any pollution before it gets to your lung tissue. But it can bypass that, embed in your lung tissue, and actually enter your bloodstream, and so affect your full system. And so there's growing research on different areas of health impacts. So we understand pretty well how air pollution affects things like cancer and your respiratory health. But there's increasing research on how it affects your cardiovascular system and also birth outcomes, as I was mentioning, more premature births before. And then also your central nervous system. So kind of what's at the core of who you are and all of your systems functioning. That's a new and burgeoning area of research. So air pollution is really, really very important to all of our health. Next slide, please. So now I'm going to kind of take us in a different direction. I've mentioned a little bit about how we've traditionally worked on air pollution with our forecasts and alerts, why it's important, how to try to protect your health from it. Now I want to talk about a new initiative that we have that will hopefully give us a clear picture of what air pollution is like from neighborhood to neighborhood. And for now, we're focusing on Franklin County. So I'm going to go through a few slides talking about this new initiative and how you can engage in it. Next slide, please. So this particular initiative is focusing on that particle pollution. And this is just a slide to go through some of that question of what particle pollution is. I already talked about how it's so tiny, it can affect your whole system. So it is linked to both heart and lung diseases, not just lung disease. And interestingly, they've also done research to look at rates of pollution, rates of exposure to particle pollution, and they've linked that to worse outcomes from COVID, which is pretty fascinating. So this is very relevant, very much of the times. Next slide, please. So there's a question of, why do we want to do this work to do monitoring of particle pollution? So this slide is getting at one of those questions, which is, how is particle pollution monitored? So if you see the two blue dots there, those are where the Ohio EPA particle pollution monitors currently exist that are providing real-time data. And so Ohio EPA does a wonderful job of taking very precise measurements of particle pollution in our region to help figure out whether or not we're achieving the current national standards for air pollution levels. So this is where they do that work, and it's wonderful that they do that. It really helps us with our with regulation of air pollution. So what we're thinking to do is we're bringing in a new technology, a relatively new technology, which are these very small air pollution monitors. They're kind of, I have to get my hand in the right place. They fit in the palm of your hand. They're relatively inexpensive, so we can use a whole bunch of them, and we can put them out across the region to get a clear picture of how particle pollution differs from neighborhood to neighborhood. And so you see those red dots there. Those aren't exactly the locations where we're going to site those monitors, but they're the proposed locations of the zip codes that we're going to target with these monitors. Next slide, please. So this project is a partnership with Franklin County Public Health and the American Geophysical Union's Thriving Earth Exchange. So yeah, it's a great partnership. We're getting a lot of support. We have a great project team, and Franklin County Public Health has really expressed their interest in looking at what does environment health look like in Franklin County in terms of air pollution, and how can we understand that better and try to impact it. Next slide, please. So here you can see a picture of me doing a pilot installation of one of the air quality monitors. So it's that little white object that's right in front of me. And so in terms of requirements for siting these monitors, they really just require a surface such as this pole. It would be better if it was higher off the ground, but something to zip tie or screw the monitor to, an electrical outlet, and a Wi-Fi network that we can access. And part of why I'm telling you about this is that we're actually looking for hosts for these monitors. And those can be individuals in the community, it can be organizations, and it can be businesses. Anybody who has a property with those requirements, the surface for installation, the electric access, and the Wi-Fi access. Next slide, please. So here I wanted to talk a little bit about how we're prioritizing where we're placing these monitors. And this this map here is not showing air pollution data. What it is showing is our best attempt at prioritizing zip codes based on some different data that was available to us to help us figure out where we want to site the monitors. So the data that we used to create this map was looking at socio-demographics. So that's how many children under the age of 5 are there in a zip code, how many people over the age of 65, what are poverty rates like in that zip code, what percent of the population is minority, and then also health data. So what are the asthma rates like in each zip code, and what were the COVID rates like in each zip code? So we bundle all of this information together to get a sense of the vulnerability of a population to air pollution exposure. And so we use that to help prioritize these zip codes. And we're planning on putting out 2 monitors in each of the most vulnerable zip codes, and then also putting a couple out in some of the area zip codes that we have, so that we have some comparison data as well. Next slide, please. So again, yeah, how can your organization help? If you're interested in being a monitor host, we would love to hear from you. We're still looking for siting opportunities in a number of those zip codes. So if you can reach out, let us know what zip code you're in. We'd love to work with you and try to get a monitor on your property. So yeah, and then we're also planning on taking the data, so the monitors will be out for a year. We'll be going back and reporting back to the communities where these monitors are, letting everybody know what the data looks like during that year. And then at the end of the year, we'll be doing a thorough analysis of the data that's comes from these monitors and try to get a sense of whether or not there are differing levels of air pollution exposure from neighborhood to neighborhood. And we will be sharing that report back out with the community as well. Next slide, please. So we're talking about what you can do, and that was what you can do in terms of that specific initiative. But I also wanted to mention what you can do when there's an air quality alert day. So some of the things that you can do are things like drive less. So if you can try to walk, bike, or bus, that's wonderful on air quality alert day. Again, that ozone pollution tends to come from cars. So if you can take your car off the road, that's wonderful. You can also combine trips. So maybe instead of taking individual trips for all your different errands, maybe you're doing 2 errands in one trip. Don't mow your lawn. So lawn mowers and other gas-powered lawn equipment, if that's what you have, tends to produce a lot of pollution. So delay that. And also wait until sundown to fuel your car. So actually when you put gasoline into your car, it releases different chemicals that are sort of precursors. They're the stuff that turns into ozone. So if you cannot do that during the day, because the sunlight and heat drives production of that ozone, that's great. Maybe wait until the next day to fuel up your car. Next slide, please. So again, I'm leaving some contact information here for my colleague, Jenny McAdams, who's with Franklin County Public Health, and then my contact information if you're interested in being involved in the initiative to do more air quality monitoring of particle pollution. Love to hear from you, or if you have questions, also feel free to reach out.
Great, thanks, Brooke. So folks, if you have questions, if you're on Facebook, you can type them in the chat in that, or the Facebook thing. And then if you're on the webinar here, use the chat or the Q&A. Now, one of the things I got from your presentation is don't mow the grass. So it gives you an excuse to not mow the grass during those air quality alert days. It also brings up something else that I know that you had mentioned, like for the sensitive groups, not to do exercise during that peak ozone time during the day. Does that really go for everybody though? Because even if you're healthy, is it still impacting you?
It is still impacting you. You might not notice as strong of symptoms as if you were somebody with asthma. You might have much more immediate symptoms. But yes, even if you don't have asthma, even if you're not a child or an older adult, yeah, still definitely consider changing up your schedule a little bit and reconsidering doing that really hard 5-mile run at 3 p.m. on an air quality alert day. That's definitely not what you want to be doing with your lungs. So just, you know, it's good to be active, stay active, but shift it a little bit. Do it in the morning, do it indoors, wait until the next day.
Cool. And we do have a question on Facebook. Have you thought about reaching out to community gardens and possibly installing the monitors at some of the community gardens?
That's a wonderful question. So yeah, we've done a fair amount of outreach in the community for the particle pollution monitoring initiative. And we did manage to connect with one of the gardens in Franklinton, which I'm very excited about. But yeah, that would be a wonderful opportunity. So if you have any input on who specifically to reach out to, I'd love that. But yeah, I should definitely look into that as well.
Cool. That was from Bill Dawson on Facebook.
Okay.
If you don't have his contact info, I do.
Okay.
Bill's a great guy. So for something else that you mentioned with the study that you're doing, so you're collecting the data, you're going to see if there's a difference in pollution neighborhood by neighborhood. You're going to share that data with the community, with those neighbors. And then what's the next step after that? Is it to try to identify the sources in the area? Is it try to maybe have a hyper-focused educational campaign of how you can mitigate and adapt? Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, that's a really good question. And definitely this initiative is that first step. If we don't have the data, we don't know if there's an issue, and then we don't know how to address the issue. So definitely the first step is just to collect the data. But then yes, so our air quality program does a lot of marketing and outreach to begin with. And definitely focusing on those zip codes where there's higher levels of exposure will definitely be a priority for us, making sure that they're definitely receiving those air quality alerts, know about the air pollution levels in their community. But yeah, I think we can also start to think about, how do we address the air pollution in some of these communities? Is it looking at the source? Is it looking at the amount of tree canopy? Are there partnerships that we can form to help address some of those issues? So we'll be definitely turning around and looking at solutions once we have the data in hand.
That's great. I like how you mentioned like the tree canopy, and it's kind of thinking it's knocking down barriers, right? So it's not just air quality. It's going to sound funny, but air quality isn't only about the air, right? It ties into everything else. And so when you do one thing like with the tree canopy, when you plant more trees, that helps reduce the heat island effect. And obviously is providing a source of food and shelter for our pollinator species and birds, and it is great for our health, both from a mental health standpoint and breathing standpoint, which a lot of people like to breathe. That's
Yeah,
cool.
agreed.
Yeah, you had mentioned also about during COVID last year that you saw a dip in the ozone pollution. Do you see that kind of going back up as things are opening up? Are there, not to put you on the spot, but are there things that businesses or organizations can do to maybe try to keep that air pollution level down?
Yeah, we have seen air pollution levels coming back up a bit. So last year, there were two factors in seeing those low ozone levels. And this tends to be true in general with air pollution. Air pollution has to do with how much pollution is being emitted, so the sources. So in this case, for ozone, it was the number of cars and trucks on our highways. So that's the source. It also has to do with what the weather is like, because air pollution isn't just emitted and doesn't and then just stay there. It gets pushed around by the winds. If it rains, it gets washed out of the air. So we did have a very cool and rainy spring last year. So that also helped to drop those ozone levels. But we saw very, very low levels, especially during the depth of the shutdown. So kind of a silver lining. So as we're thinking about how we're moving forward, we really do need to be thinking about our transportation systems. And that can include things like maybe workplaces are being more flexible and continuing to allow employees to work from home for part of the time so that they're not commuting every day. It also has to do with forming equitable transportation systems. So we need to think both about how we get cars off the roadways, but also about how we're making sure that people do have access to good transportation. So we need to be thinking about mass transit and how we're building that into our systems in Columbus, Ohio.
I think, I can't remember the official name of it, but I think you all in the MidOhio Regional Planning Commission have a kind of like a guide for businesses that want to develop a work from home or work from place type policy. Is that correct?
Yes, we do. So yeah, if you go to Morpsc's website, you can find a telework policy document that can really help guide employers through what are the considerations about putting in place an official telework policy, what are the benefits for the employees, what are some of the steps that you have to take in order to do that. So yeah, we definitely have some guidance on that.
That's great. And maybe that's a future GreenSpot conversation too.
Definitely.
For some of our GreenSpot business members. The other thing too is that strikes me is like over the years, just I know this is a little bit off topic, but like the regulation side of things and the efforts that like government has done, nonprofits have done, obviously regional planning commissions have done, school districts to address air pollution, to have laws on the books or grant programs available to install emission controls, or maybe if school is interested in doing like a no idle policy, like getting help with that. It seems it really is it takes a village to reduce air pollution.
It does. And as you were mentioning before, when you start thinking about some of these issues, sometimes they seem insurmountable, but I think one of the cool things about working on these issues is that they're so highly interrelated and they are complex. But like you mentioned, things like planting more trees can really impact a lot of different issues at the same time. So yeah, we need to be coming at these issues with a lot of different solutions in order to really tackle them. But yeah, there's a lot that each of us can do, and we're really excited to support our community in finding those solutions and moving them forward.
Awesome. Well, it looks like we don't have any more questions on Facebook. And let me check here. Stop sharing the screen. I know you figure after a year and a half of doing webinars and stuff, I would be a little bit more adept at this, but it's always a learning process, right?
It is. It is.
All right, so it looks like there aren't any more questions. Do you have any, I know you just said like words of wisdom. Do you have any other words of wisdom before we take off here?
Just, feel free to reach out if you're interested in hosting an air quality monitor. If you want those alerts or forecasts, definitely visit our website and sign up for those. They're free. And yeah, let's think together about things like our transportation systems and how we're building them equitably and environmentally.
Great. Well, thank you so much, Brooke. This has been really helpful and really educational. Some folks on Facebook are saying thank you as well. So we're going to go ahead and stop the live streaming on Facebook. And let me go ahead and stop recording.